Hi, I'm NFI Hammer and welcome to my channel, where a real beginner, me, takes on Warhammer painting, so you can see what it actually looks like when you're just starting out. No pro-level wizardry here, just fun, frustration, and hopefully some decent looking miniatures. Today I'm tackling my first ever Skaven, 5 sneaky, stabby ratmen from the Emberguard set, Zikkit's Tunnelpack. I've painted the Stormcast already, but these little furballs? Whole new challenge. Will they turn out awesome, or will I regret everything? You're about to find out. Let's get started. Alright, time to get these sneaky little rodents off their sprues and into fighting shape. Underworlds models are all push fit, which means no glue, just some very satisfying clicks as they piece together. Don't let that fool you though, some of these connections are tighter than a Skaven's grip on stolen Warpstone, and trust me, Skaven do not like to share. First things first, clipping the parts off the sprues. Sometimes I like to leave a little extra when cutting and then trim it down later to avoid ugly nubs. And I really struggle with mold lines, like even just seeing them, but it is worth the effort if you can be bothered, because the better they are now, the better it'll be later when it comes to priming. For priming, I'm using Rust-Oleum Flat White Primer I got from Bunnings, the local hardware store. I like it because it's cheap, and I like cheap. But the problem is the can's almost empty, and a tropical cyclone is currently trying to rip my roof off. So adding, humidity and an empty can created a really patchy coverage. Some areas are drowning in paint, and others look like they dodged the can entirely. So, because this is a beginner channel, I'm just going to keep rolling with it and do an overbrushing with a makeup brush here and the Corax White, which is a base Citadel paint. And I'm just trying to get all the coverage and everything just to kind of hide those green sprue colors and just trying to even it out. And the good thing is if I make a mistake and I need to paint it back to the base color, I can just use Corax White, because it matches it, whereas the white from the primer is slightly different color. So it's just better if you just do a quick coat, and then that way you can easily make fixes to the mistakes that I'm invariably going to be making. The next color is Runelord Brass, and this is a brand new pot. I finished the last pot painting my Necrons. Well, feel free to check out those videos if that's something that interests you. And so I'm just painting all the grenades and bombs, anything kind of standing out as sort of metallic that the Skaven would want to make out of a durable metal. This is kind of like an easy, fun step. There's not really any right or wrong answers. You just kind of paint whatever you think is kind of going to be really tough. Next color that we'll do is a complementary metallic color, so that it kind of breaks up some of this rather than looking all as one giant blob. So the color I'm going to use is Leadbelcher, which again is a new pot that I'm very excited to finally have finished. Some of my old ones, so they kind of dried out. And here I'm just going through and finding anything like these Edward scissor hand claws on this model. I think looking like a silver kind of will, make it look a little bit different. And then also this guy has this armor plating that I think will look good in the silver, though there is quite a lot on this model, so I might come back later and try and think of a way of breaking it up a little bit. And then also this crazy guy on this unicycle, the inner workings of this contraption, I'm painting silver. Next for the fur, we've got Mechanicus Standard Grey, which is this dark grey, and I'm doing that as like a base coat. I might come in later and do some light grey highlights, but now I'm just trying to find all the fur in the model. And it's a little bit tricky because these Skaven are quite unwell, and they've got like exposed, skin that isn't covered in fur, as it's kind of like in their arms and legs. So it is a little bit tricky to separate out the fur from the rest of the model. And also this guy's got bandages and stuff like that. And then the big warpstone weapons, I'm also painting in grey here, just to give it a dark undercoat, so when we come up later with green, it'll have some different tones. Next is Dark Reaper. So this colour here I really like painting on leather because it kind of has like a bluey green tinge to it, so it doesn't look just very boring. However, in hindsight, I probably would not pick this colour. So if you're following along in this tutorial, maybe just pick a black colour or, you know, a brown colour or something. Because what ends up happening is that the Dark Reaper, even though there is a colour hint to it, it ends up looking very similar to the fur colour that we just painted. And although there is very subtle distinction between the two, it's not as dramatic a difference, and so it can kind of look like their fur goes over their hoods and on their gloves. Next, for the tails, I'm using this Doomfire Magenta for the ears, nose and tail, and this is a contrast paint. So contrast paints are meant to be like speed paints where you can kind of quickly apply a coat and it's done. However, I did end up watering it down because when I was applying it directly from the bottle, it was creating a really red effect, and I was kind of wanting more of a light pink color. But it does work well with going into the recesses of the model and making it darker. But you can see here with the full strength, it's basically a red color, which is not what I was after, so we'll come back later and try and fix that. And then I've got this Reikland Fleshshade. I'm trying to cover the exposed skin that I was talking about earlier, just anywhere in the feet and the arms and the hands and the face as well, where not the nose or mouth or ears, but the rest of the face. I'm just trying to give it a coverage, but because this is a shade, not a contrast paint, it does kind of create a bit of a patchy experience. Like some parts are quite dark, whereas others are very light. It kind of works okay because it is a flesh tone and people's skin aren't all one color, but you know, it probably wasn't the right paint for this. But the next color is the Akhelian Green, but in my brain I think this is a blue color, so let me know in the comments below if you think I'm colorblind. But for this one I'm just going over straight from the pot directly on to all the outfits. I decided to deviate a little from the box art here and instead paint all of these in the same blue color. And I did that because when I did my Brethren of the Bolt from the Wintermoor set, I painted them all different colors because I thought they were all kind of unique and different, but that ended up kind of not looking like a cohesive warband. So I thought this time, let's make all the Skaven, you know, be in their uniform, which is going to be this blue. Next up we got Cadian Fleshtone, which I'm going to use for the wood parts of the models. They've got wood in their weapons, their armor, even the unicycle contraption. Now this is sort of like a light brown color, probably too light for using wood, but I don't really have any good wood colors. So what I'm going to do is start off with the light brown and then come back later with a dark wash. Artemis here is joining me, which is nice, but the color I'm trying to get to is Warpstone Glow. So this is a green color that I use to paint all of the Warpstone energy, hence the name. But this is really easy to paint because all the green parts are really sticking out from the model. And I've got a lot of experience with the Necron Gauze energy, so this was super easy to do. Next up I'm doing fire, which I've never really done before. So I've got like a yellow, an orange and a red color. You can pretty much use any of those colors that you want. And I just start off painting the whole flame yellow and just giving it a nice even coat. And then I'm going to go over the top 2/3 with the orange color. So what that does is it kind of creates a little bit of a blending approach, but you want to leave some yellow in the base of the flame. And then finally getting the red color, which I'm using Evil Sun Scarlet here, and just painting the tips of the flame. So just maybe 30%. And then while I've got the yellow Averland Sunset out, I've actually noticed that this model here has some ropes on it. So I'm just going to color in those ropes with the yellow, just to kind of give it a bit of a different look from the other textures. But yeah, you probably would be able to do this in white or the Dark Reaper color. And then finally I'm using a really bright Phalanx Yellow here, and I've diluted it with a lot of water, and I've just created kind of like a wash, and I'm just going over the whole flame. And what this does is it kind of creates it like a lens or a filter, I guess, over the colors. And this basically brings those three colors that we worked with before together, like one unified color, rather than like having the three distinct layers. But the effect is really subtle, especially on such a tiny flame like this, that you could easily skip this step and you wouldn't really notice the difference, to be honest. Then I'm going to get the black color, so I use Abaddon Black, but really any black color here would do. And I'm just trying to paint in the nails of these shifty Skaven. So I couldn't really work out what a good nail color would be, but I'm assuming they're all full of, you know, dirt and grime and grease and stuff. So I'm just painting the fingertips here all black. And then I realized I forgot to paint the warpstone in the middle of the armor here. So I'm doing that. And while I've got some black, I'm using a dry brush with the black paint loaded in, and I'm just brushing the flames with the black. And what that does is it just brings out the very tips with that black color, and it kind of just gives it a darker color. Again, you could easily skip it. Here, Pink Horror is a layer paint, and I'm going through and just fixing up the tails. So the contrast paint didn't really work the way I had hoped. So in hindsight, I might just skip it entirely and just start with the Pink Horror. So there's like parts like the ear here that I've missed. I haven't really missed it, but the contrast paint doesn't give good coverage, as well as, you know, parts of the tail. So it's really just going through and just kind of cleaning up everywhere. You can see that there's lots of white parts of the model. And again, yeah, the ears and the nose. So yeah, in hindsight, maybe skip the contrast paint. And now I'm using Moot Green. So Moot Green is just a more vibrant green than Warpstone Glow, you can see here. So I'm just kind of picking up some edges and just giving that lighter color. And then I'm trying to pick out the edges of the Warpstone weapon and just trying to color those in just to kind of give a highlight effect. It's probably way too thick. I've loaded up too much paint on the brush here, but we'll try and come back later and fix that up. And then I've also noticed there's these wires here. This is probably the hardest of the green to paint in the model, is just this little section here on the wood on the unicycle, but just being careful and patient. And then the models are pretty much done, but the white looks really out of place. So I've got this Seraphim Sepia, I can never pronounce it properly, and I'm just using this to color in the white areas of the model, except for like the teeth, and just giving it a bit of a worn look. So I'm using it for the bandages, I'm using it for the wicks of the flames. And it really, you know, it's a 2-second step, but this one is well worth it. If you don't have this, you could probably use an Agrax Earthshade or any other sort of brown wash, but I just had the sepia color, so I'm using it. But it's almost an immediate effect on the model of like just turning those white areas into something much better. So the wood, as I said earlier, was going to come back with a dark wash. So now I've got the Rhinox Hide, and I've watered it down considerably, so it's really just very liquidy, and I'm just trying to give it a generous coverage over all of the wooden areas, and what that does is it seeps into the little recesses. So Games Workshop does a really good job on these models of creating this sort of textured wooden texture, I guess, and what this does is it just fills it in, and then the stuff that doesn't go into the grooves just darkens that Cadian Fleshtone into a much richer brown color, which is what we want for the wood. Let me know if you've got any other techniques for wood. And then finally, this is the only non-Citadel paint. It's a Mr. Hobby Metallic Blue-Green, and I'm just painting in the little goggles of the model. So some of them have these sort of beveled goggles on their hoods, and I'm just using this because it creates like a glass-like texture, but you honestly could just paint over with a blue wash to have pretty much the same effect, or you can just paint it any color you want. But for me, I'm just using this because I feel like it looks cool and I have it. And I'm also using it for this weird spiral part of the gun because I don't really understand how that connects with anything. So I just was like, I might as well use it since I've got it loaded on the brush. But yeah, I'm just trying to carefully not get too much onto the mask. And then finally, I've got a light grey colour, Administratum Grey, and I'm just doing like a very quick feathering type, picking up the highlights of the Mechanica Standard Grey fur, just to give the fur a bit more texture, because it was kind of looking very one tone, and it also helps differentiate it from that Dark Reaper colour. I want to really quickly cover the basing in under 5 minutes. So here I've got Rhinox Hide that I've added a little bit of water to just thin it out. Not to a wash consistency, but just to make it a little bit runnier and lighter. And I'm just kind of overbrushing with a makeup brush that I stole from my wife, and I'm just kind of covering the whole model. Then I'm using Leadbelcher, which is the same color I used on the models themselves, and I'm just pulling out any metallic detail that's in the bases. So there's these railroad tracks, there's some nails that hold the railroad down, there's a pickaxe and a nail and a hammer, and I'm just kind of painting all of the metal, just that one color. You don't have to be super accurate about it because the brown is kind of like an earthy color. So even if you miss a little bit or it's a little bit thin, it actually kind of adds to the depth of it. And I don't like making the bases too bright because you're trying not to draw attention away. And then we're using the same wood recipe that we used before. So it's important to use the same recipe because there's actually some of the wood joins up. So if you use different recipes, it's not going to create the same immersion. But you could do different woods for like the backpacks and the unicycle. But just calling out, there is that one panel that's on the feet of one of the models that needs to join perfectly here. But again, you know, I'm just trying not to get it into the recesses too much, just so that the recesses stand out. And then we're using the same Rhinox Hide wash that we just used, and just really adding that in. And again, this does the two purposes of darkening the Cadian Fleshtone into a darker brown, and also just pulling out those really cool details of the model to make it look more wood-like. This is kind of like a relaxing step. I kind of like doing the bases because it's not as stressful as the model. Once that's dried, it's time then to do the Rakarth Flesh. So you could use any color for this, but I just wanted to paint the stones on the ground an earthy kind of grey color. I know that this typically is used for bone, not really stones, but because we have a lot of grey on the fur and in the hoods and stuff, that I was trying to kind of go in a different direction here for the stones. And I thought the Rakarth Flesh here might do it. Sometimes I put Agrax Earthshade over it, and sometimes I do edge highlighting, but I just not bothering with this. And then finally, Abaddon Black, which is the black details. So there's a lot of toenails on these models that are a part of the base. So I'm just painting those toenails black to match the hands and the other models. And I'll also paint the toes the same Reikland Fleshshade and white color, the exact same recipe. And then I also like to paint the rims black. It's a very traditional color, but I find that it helps make the bases pop. And then I've noticed that there were some of these flat kind of puddle areas. And so in my mind, I'm like, well, this is like a dirty mine and maybe there's some water that's pooled. So by combining the Warpstone Glow and the Rhinox Hide has created this green, muddy texture. But it doesn't really read as liquid. So I've got some technical Ard coat here, which is kind of like a glossy varnish, and I'm applying a super thick coat just into the pooled areas. And what this does is when it dries, it'll actually create kind of like a reflective surface. So I'm trying not to get any on the dirt or the stones and just kind of coloring in the watery, wet areas. And well, hopefully this will turn out okay. And putting it all together now, I personally cut off the little pegs and just glue using super glue the model to the base. You can definitely use it. I just find that it sometimes doesn't fit very well and create a really hard seal, or it juts out a little bit, whereas this way I find is just bulletproof and idiot proof. So here's the finished models now that they're all assembled and put onto the bases, but it's still too bright. So I've got the Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to apply this wash over all of the bronze Runelord Brass color. And you can see here, it just kind of instantly makes the model look more grimy and more realistic. Without it, the brass color looks kind of fake and plasticky, which makes sense because it is fake and plastic, but adding this wash over the top really brings out a lot of depth. Any shadows or recesses or grooves, the paint pulls into and just really gives it kind of a three-dimensional and a real kind of metallic-y finish. And it doesn't matter if you get any over any of the other surfaces because it's just a brown wash. It just kind of disappears when it dries. And then for the silvery parts, I like to use a Nuln Oil. So this is just a black wash. You can make some yourself by diluting some black paint, but I do this one over the silver because it creates the shadow effects, same as before, but it doesn't change the color to a brownie color. It just keeps it silver, but just adds the depth. And doing some on the Edward Scissorhand claws here, just to give them a little bit more depth, and the blade on the back here, and the armor, I don't know what you call that, gauntlet maybe, of the soldier, and the breastplate here. And then I noticed that the chain armor here in the models looked a little bit boring. So I've got some Druchii Violet purple color, which is a wash, and I'm just doing the I don't know what you call it, it's like a sporran type armor plating here in that purple color. And this is completely optional. I just kind of improvised last minute, but it does kind of give it a little bit more of an ornate, I don't know what the word is, decorative or just more interesting look than just the silver. And then this other model also has a double armor plate here, so I'm just covering that just to keep it consistent. But again, totally optional, weird step. And then I'm using Corax White dry brushing here just to kind of highlight the edges. And then I'm using another technical paint called Tesseract Glow. And you got to give the bottle a really good shake. Otherwise, it's segments into the different layers. And then you just kind of apply the whole thing with this wash. And it's the same as the Agrax Earthshade or the Nuln Oil in that you can kind of just cover the whole thing with it. And when it dries on those like white highlighted dry brushed areas, it's very vibrant green, and on the darker green, it's less vibrant. And if you get any on the model, it's actually okay because it's kind of like a glowing effect. So it's pretty cool. And then finally, I was using Runefang Steel, which is really bright silver, just to give a bit of an edge highlight onto this model here, because I noticed that it was really dark with all that Nuln Oil. But I put on a bit too thick an edge highlight. If it was probably like half the width, it would look really good, but I just was using a really big brush because it was the same brush I was using for the whole model. And it kind of looks a little bit silly. I do kind of regret this step. I probably shouldn't have bothered, or if I did bother, just make sure I had a thinner step. But, you know, it didn't ruin the model, but I don't think it really added anything. And then I just kind of pick up some of the edges of just silver stuff. And then lastly, I wanted to edge highlight the Dark Reaper. So I just mixed some Dark Reaper with some Corax White just to create a lighter version, but still keeping the exact same hue. And then I'm just going over any of the gloves or the hood that I think the natural light would kind of catch. And it just creates kind of like more of a three-dimensional look to it. Otherwise, it's kind of just very one tone. And there's also these like pouches and stuff that I haven't really talked about in the video, but I just painted them Dark Reaper as well. And I'm just going over now with the edge highlight just to kind of bring out those details. But again, I'm doing a too thick edge highlight. I think using a much thinner brush or less paint on the brush would be good. But lots of talking. Let's look at the finished product now. So here are these 5 Skaven ready to launch into Emberguard Underworlds game. I'm really happy with how they turned out. Honestly, these are maybe the favorite models that I've ever painted on this channel, which is a pretty big claim, but I just think they have a lot of personality and a lot of uniqueness to it. I think each model here kind of has its own story and its background. I think it worked really well. Again, I probably wouldn't go the Dark Reaper and pick like a completely different color for the models, just to make it different from the fur. Anyway, if you've liked this channel and you want to support me, consider leaving a like, comment, or a subscribe. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm if you do that. And I try and respond to every single comment. Anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.